And now, it's Boomer Life, lifestyle discussion designed to make your life more engaging, meaningful, and complete. Celebrating the baby boomer generation, this is Boomer Life on CIL 650.
And welcome to Boomer Life on CIL 650. I'm Joanne Sutton, and today we're joined by our friends from the Alzheimer's Society of British Columbia. September is World Alzheimer's Month, and we have a lot to talk about today, lots to share, and a lot to remember as well as we continue the conversation about the journey of Alzheimer's and dementia, hoping to raise awareness about the disease and remove some of the stigmas. In studio with me today is Maria Howard, CEO of the Alzheimer's Society of BC. So Maria, thanks for joining us here today.
Oh, thanks for having me again, Joanne.
Excellent. So Maria, last episode, we talked all about the topic of wandering. We heard the perspective of a caregiver on that subject when Ellen Allen joined us in the studio. Today, we are going to focus on World Alzheimer's Month, which happens every September. It's definitely a time to remember the lives and experiences of the people around us who live with Alzheimer's disease or other dementias. But before we begin, as always, we want to remind our listeners that there's a lot of information online about the Alzheimer's Society of BC, as well as a wealth of resources on the website. So please feel free to visit it anytime, www.alzheimerbc.org. So Maria, this week, you and I are going to be talking with our guests about World Alzheimer's Month. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about that and what it means?
World Alzheimer's Month is September, and it's a wonderful time internationally for many countries to stop and really promote what is Alzheimer's dementia and really begin to increase awareness and try to change the stigma and the culture around that. And everything that the Alzheimer's Society does within our province is focused on awareness, whether it's our dementia-friendly communities, which we've talked about a couple times, where we're looking to help people become much more engaged and have safety and accessibility in their community. It's the first link where we reach out to families and provide them support and services. And it's also through raising money for research. It's all around awareness and changing the face of how we all see Alzheimer's dementia. And World Alzheimer's Month is focused on that. And the theme this year is actually Remember Me.
So how do we get that message out to the public? What are some of the specific things you do with the Alzheimer's Society to spread the word about World Alzheimer's Month?
Well, you know, what is really important is to find a common message that we can keep sharing to communities. And again, because it's World Alzheimer's Month, those communities aren't just in Vancouver, the North Shore, British Columbia, Canada. They are across the world. And the idea of Remember Me is really around the fact that when someone has dementia or someone has Alzheimer's, they do change. Their behaviors, their personalities do change because of this very challenging disease. But what we want to encourage people is that we want to see people first and the disease second. And so the idea behind the theme of Remember Me for World Alzheimer's Month is don't forget the person who is now challenged and struggling with this disease.
And living with it, yes.
Absolutely. Remember who they are. Remember how they want to be remembered. And so stigma and language becomes really important in the message for World Alzheimer's Month.
So what are some of the specific programs that you're implementing right now for Remember Me?
Through the Remember Me campaign, we have quite an active social media campaign, and the hashtag is Remember Dementia. And it's a place to start the conversation, and that's to talk about how do you think about people who are touched by dementia and their families, and how we can change communities to make life for those individuals continue to be productive and enjoyable, and people feeling that they're still contributing even though they're struggling with the disease. We have a number of events that happen within the September month that again focus on awareness. And we also encourage people through their conversations to be thinking about what is the story behind the person who is living with the disease and how can they make a change by reaching out to others.
I really enjoy the name Remember Me. I'm just wondering how you came up with that. Was that something that was done locally, or did it have national input? Or
there's an international body, which is the Alzheimer's Disease International, and they really are a leader in promoting Alzheimer's throughout the world. And they typically set the themes and encourage the number of different countries and nations to begin to think about that. We know that really there is a lot of stigma, there's a lot of myth about what what it's like to have Alzheimer's. People think it's an old person's disease. People think it's a natural part of aging. And all those things are not necessarily true.
In some ways, they could be, though.
They could be. There are lots of natural changes that happen as we age. Memory gets more challenging. People get tired. It's harder to manage a number of different things. But often the behavior changes we see with someone who has Alzheimer's is very different. It's forgetting things that are very common. It's really beginning to not know how to do things like get dressed or make decisions of habits or behaviors that one has done. It's people becoming maybe aggressive when they've always been quite easygoing, or vice versa. People who've been very social suddenly become withdrawn. And so those behavior changes which come with Alzheimer's start to cloud what people might think of that individual. And we really want people to remember that person has a disease, and they're changing of the behavior as a result of it. So don't forget that person who is being, actually hidden in this disease.
We've actually heard some of those stories firsthand from some of the guests we've had on this show, talking in first person after being diagnosed with Alzheimer's and going through some of those changes and questioning their own behavior. And I know I've used the example in a past show, it's not just losing your keys or forgetting where you've put your keys, your purse. It's not knowing what those keys are for. It goes to a deeper level, doesn't it?
It does, and it becomes really important, because if you are a family member or a caregiver looking after someone who has forgotten how to sit in a chair, and you hear that multiple times every day about this individual doesn't know how to sit in a chair, it becomes very frustrating, and it becomes almost to the point where it begins to cloud a person's perception of that individual that they are trying to care for and that they love. And so it's really tough to be able to manage that. And that's where we need as communities to help families. So help families be able to do that. And the other thing, Joanne, is language is so important. One of the things that the Alzheimer's Society really promotes is thinking about language. And we really promote person-centered care, which is the person first before the disease. And I think a really good example of that is you will hear that people often talk about the patient. A person with Alzheimer's isn't necessarily a patient. They are not necessarily in a hospital. They're not necessarily having an acute illness, which is having active treatment by a physician. So even the simple language of labeling someone who has Alzheimer's as suddenly as a patient changes the way we approach them. It really actually disempowers them. And so what we want to do is think about language and how we keep people empowered and enabling to have quality of life.
Well, it sounds like the theme of this year's World Alzheimer's Month heavily focuses a lot on compassion, which our second guest on today's show which is going to be Kathy Borey, and I know she can speak to very eloquently. She has written a book. It's called The Long Hello, and this book has a lot of buzz right now. It was launched earlier this year. So Vancouver author Kathy Borey is going to share her experience today on this show with her mother's dementia in the form of sort of brief lyrical vignettes that create a magical voice, and it weaves humor and insight into a very honest and raw and beautiful story. So I know we're going to hear firsthand from Kathy about her journey of dementia as she followed that journey with her mother.
It's a wonderful book, and she has such a great way of expressing her story and her experience.
Did you get to read the book?
I have read it, yes.
See, I haven't read it yet. I feel horrible admitting that, but it's definitely it's in the top 5 of my list right now. So also on today's show, Rebecca Morris is going to join us. Now, she's the Provincial Coordinator of Advocacy and Public Policy. She's going to be talking to us in more detail later in the episode about the intersection of language and stigma, which is something you've just touched on, Maria. She's going to discuss the more insidious nature of humor around dementia and how the language that we use and the humor we draw on can either challenge stereotypes about people with dementia or it could actually break them down. The idea of breaking down stereotypes relates to the aims of dementia-friendly communities. So, Maria, can you just explain a little bit about what that means, a dementia-friendly community? I know we've discussed it in other shows, but bring us up to date.
The dementia-friendly community is the concept that as a community, which whether that's a city or a town or a library or a book club, is a group of people who come together to share, to support, to be compassionate. And so a dementia-friendly community is one that takes some time to think about how the experience of someone who has Alzheimer's can participate in that community and feel safe, feel that they are a productive, engaged member of that community.
Also, in our last segment of today's show on Boomer Life, we're going to discuss another way that you can get involved with the society. We're going to be speaking with Sandy Riley and her experience with the MKGG, we call it, the Mount Kilimanjaro Grouse Grind, and her experience with Ascent for Alzheimer's. The Ascent sees a group of up to 12 people where they go and they hike Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa as they fundraise to help support those in this province in BC who are affected by dementia. Now, the Mount Kilimanjaro Grouse Grind is held on September 27th this year. It's roughly around the same time that the Kilimanjaro team is on their ascent of the mountain in Africa. And for the MKGG event, teams here get pledges to go up the Grouse Grind 7 times, roughly the same height as the ascent for Kilimanjaro Path. So, Maria, what's the association or the common ground between a campaign like this Mount Kilimanjaro Grouse Grind event and dementia-friendly communities? What's the common ground here?
The common ground is that both of them are a journey, and both of them have to think about how they can support people with dementia who are still very much contributing members of that community. So the Ascent group really are beginning a journey that is very much like people who are living with Alzheimer's or the families who are experiencing that journey and what it's like. There's lots of ups and downs. There's lots of really hard work. There's lots of moments of happiness and laughter, and there's always there's a goal, but really the journey is much more important than the goal in many ways. And that's how the Ascent for Alzheimer's really mirrors what we're trying to promote in dementia-friendly communities.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing a lot more about World Alzheimer's Month. So, Maria, let's take a quick break right now. We'll be able to come back to talk to our first guest in just a moment. This is Boomer Life on CL 650 and a conversation about the journey of dementia. We'll be right back.
Celebrating the baby boomer lifestyle. This is Boomer Life on CL 650.